All right. Well, hey, welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Mark Mara. I'm here with Michael Mapson. Say hi, Mapson.
Hello.
Great to be here. Brand new podcast, fresh off the presses. Very exciting for both of us. I know that Mapson has just been uh, chomping at the bit for so long to be able to do some content with me. So very happy to be able to do that. And I think we got some good stuff here for you today. What Come on, Mavson. What are you laughing at? We have some fantastic topics to talk about. Banned and restricted, everybody's favorite topic. Are you not excited by this?
I am excited, and I am excited to record a podcast again. I'm sure a lot of you know me from the Dark Depths podcast, which has ceased its run, and now I'm ready to start on this journey with my buddy Mark.
Here we go. That's right. So let's jump in then. We both play Modern, although I'll admit I play Modern quite a bit less than uh, I have maybe in the past in the current meta, but we both play Modern. We both play RCQs and try to get on that RC grind. And so I think there were probably not too many people surprised by no changes, given that we're right in the middle of RCQ season and Wizards has been pretty, I think, clear on their communication that they don't love changing the format sort of mid-cycle. But that said, I mean, what are your thoughts on no changes in Modern in the latest BNR?
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, they had announced that there weren't going to be any changes for Modern this go around, which I feel like it was a bit preemptive when they said that. But it's fine. You and I were actually just talking about this the other day. We both kind of feel like modern's not great right now, but it's also like weird and complicated and not terrible at the same time, right? Like there's a lot of diversity, but like I don't know, the gameplay of some of these decks, like the games against Boros Energy are sometimes really good and really interesting, but also sometimes it just like kills you on like turn four or effectively turn three, and it was just like there was nothing you could have done. Similarly, my favorite deck game with the Titan, it's like sometimes they just kill you on turn two and nothing mattered. Versus other times the games are really interesting, and same thing with Belcher. It's just like all these decks that like none of them seem too strong, but they all just have games where your opponent just doesn't exist effectively. So it's like I don't know that it needs a ban, but it also would be nice to have a shakeup. I don't know. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think necessarily that the format there's any deck that's unbeatable or from a power level perspective that needs to get knocked down a peg. Some people might disagree around energy just because of sort of the volume of top eight results and stuff on Moto that it puts up. But I don't think that there's like a breach problem in the format right now per se, where there's something that's head and shoulders above everything else. It's just like, at least from my perspective, it's just kind of like boring to play. I think to your point. It's just so many decks have kind of like a game over button in them that you're almost like racing to that, and a lot of the other things up to that just kind of don't matter. And it's just for me, it's not gameplay that I love. So even though it might be a bit of a balanced format from a win rate perspective, there's kind of a lot of rock paper scissor going on, and there's a lot of matchups where you kind of feel like you didn't have a ton of agency, just simply because of the matchup. So I don't know. I don't know if that means that you should ban something, if you should unban a bunch of stuff, if you should just see what happens when new sets come out. I don't know, but I think based on power level alone, and the fact that we're in the middle of a season, probably no surprise that there were no changes. Now, at the end of the season, it'll be interesting to see if maybe they try to take another card out of energy or something and see what happens there. But I don't I don't think like the data necessarily supports that right now.
Yeah, I don't think I would make like, let's say the season ended tomorrow. I still don't think I would make any changes. Despite it not being like my favorite place the format's ever been in, like it is diverse. Like there's so many different decks that you could take to an event and be like, oh yeah, you are like actually trying to win, you know? And you couldn't always say that. Like there was a while where it's like, going back to like the Breach format, it was like play Breach, play Energy, Amulet, or like arguably the black white deck, and like if you playing anything else, you're just like throwing throwing away points, you know. Versus right now, you could like show up with Neoform, you could show up with Belcher, you could show up with Energy, you can show up with Zoo, you can show up with Amulet, like Brute Scale, which like I don't know if you've been paying much attention to that deck, but that deck seems to be like on a rise. Like I feel like I'm constantly hearing people say it's the best deck, which is funny because it's not putting up best deck numbers, but like I don't know. But yeah, I think the format's fine.
I did enjoy. I was trying to count while you were naming off decks that you were saying were viable to play. You named, I think it was six of them, and four of them are degenerate combo decks. I would just like to point that out. Belcher, what was it? You said Belcher, Amulet, Neoform. There was one other one, but yeah, just kind of. And you didn't even mention Storm, which pops up still from time to time. So yeah, you can do anything you want as long as it's either energy or completely degenerate.
Well, I would say
Just don't register
Zoo.
counterspell.
I think Zoo literally just won a challenge, right? I think Zoo,
Sure.
yeah, I want to just
Yeah.
won a challenge. That's not degenerate. Um, the Esper mid range deck has been doing well, like essentially the black white blink deck with Psychic Frog. It's actually at my last RCQ I lost to that deck. I was pretty sad about it. Is it Prowess has been doing okay. Tide, a favorite of yours, has started winning a lot more lately, I believe. Although it's the Demir version, I know you prefer blue red.
Well, I haven't been under that delusion in a while that blue red's playable. So, although I did see it was didn't it just win the showcase challenge with a white splash for pest controls? So
It did.
yeah, I believe that was like the Thought Scour Oculus version with some pest controls, which is always neat to see that deck do well. But I think it's a risky proposition to be registering counterspell in modern right now.
I don't know. I've had some friends pick it up. They all seem to be pretty high on it. Um, I haven't given it a fair go myself, but yeah, I mean it's putting up numbers.
Yeah, well, I hope so because that's the kind of deck I like to play. But uh, it's maybe with prowess falling off, that opens up some space for the blue black deck because one of the big problems was that you just couldn't beat a resolved Corey Steel Cutter. And there was a few weeks there where it looked like prowess was going to be the deck to beat, and I think Energy's kind of beat it back into a more reasonable position in the meta. So, maybe blue black is a little bit better position now than it was a month and a half ago. But yeah, that was if you didn't hold up a blue for spell snare and you let a steel cutter come down, you were in a pretty rough spot as the blue black player if you didn't have the board state to be able to win the race.
Yeah. So that was modern. Normally, I feel like the two of us would be talking about Legacy next, but you're also a big Vintage player. So before we get to Legacy, which is I think the majority of people are going to want to hear about, there's no changes to Vintage. Do you think that was good? Do you think that was bad? As the expert here,
As
you
the
know.
yes, as the vintage expert out of the two of us on the podcast, I do love playing vintage. I think it's fine. Really, what you hear people complaining about is Lurrus, and for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with vintage or haven't played in a while, um, Lurrus was the first card banned since I think it was like 1996 in vintage for pure power level. Like the other cards in vintage that are banned are either dexterity cards like Chaos Orb that you have to physically flip, or cards that reference anti or other mechanics that are no longer allowed in the game, like stickers. And so, really, like, you just do not outright ban cards in Vintage. It's really the place where you can play almost everything that's ever been printed. And so, when a card's a problem, you restrict it to one per deck. And so, you end up in these situations where you play a ton of tutors and a ton of one offs in a lot of the decks to make up for the fact that you can only play one copy of your most powerful cards. Now, Lurrus is self-restricting in the sense that if it's your companion, you can't play Lurrus in your main deck as well. And so, like, the safety valve that you have in Vintage for cards that are a problem of restriction just doesn't work for Lurrus because you're already only playing one. And because of the companion mechanic, you always have access to it. So it's this situation where, like, Lurrus is very good. It's in a number of the best decks. There's Lurrus Control, there's Lurrus PO, There's various versions of it: blue, black, Esper, Azorius. So there are quite a diverse set of Lurrus decks, but the reality is that Lurrus does sort of condense the format down. People aren't playing things like Narset or Dak Fade-In or even Oko has really fallen out of the format because you can't play those cards with Lurrus. So there are some people that sort of think that Lurrus is a bit too good, especially when you realize that it brings Black Lotus back from your graveyard for free, which if you ever go like Lotus, Lurrus, replay Lotus, I mean, that's the only way that gets better is if you follow it up with a Time Walk and then do it again the next turn. So, there are some people that, again, think Lurrus is a bit too much. I don't know. I think the bar has to be really high. And personally, I think that Lurrus does make the fairer vintage decks viable, which is a good thing in my opinion. So I think Lurrus was really probably the only thing that might have been on the BNR radar for vintage. And I think it's right to not do anything, but I also think because of the unique nature of the companion mechanic, making it always available in the fact that you were already only playing one Lurrus anyway, I would understand if down the road they decide to do something about it, but I think that totally reasonable to not touch vintage at the moment. So that's my 2 cents there.
Okay, so this is a genuine question from somebody who doesn't really play the format.
Yeah.
If you wanted to nerf Loris, is there any consideration as to just like restricting a card that's played in that deck? Like, could you just hit Mishra's Bauble and reduce the card draw, or like restrict Orcus Bowmasters as one of the best cards to like bring back, or is that just kind of silly?
I mean, I guess you could. Like, there is sort of a precedent in vintage for restricting silly cards to, like, leave the good cards in place. Like, if you look at a bunch of the artifacts that are restricted, if you don't realize that they're on the list because of Mishra's Workshop and the fact that they consciously will not restrict Workshop, as an example, or the fact that, like Golgari Grave Troll is restricted because they're not going to restrict Bazaar of Baghdad. But I think once you realize that there's a bunch of derpy cards that are on the list to protect some of the more powerful historic cards in the format, uh, yeah. Although I think, dude, it would be so weird to see Mishra's Blobble on a restricted list, and a lot of the decks really are only playing one or two of them anyway. Like you don't really have the space in a vintage deck for four baubles typically. So I don't know what you would restrict. Bowmasters maybe, but there are some decks that are already down to two, and um, it does sort of bring up the interesting point of like if you're playing Lurrus, it's sort of Bowmaster is the best draw punish in the format, and then Narset, which is restricted. The 3 mana Narset from War of the Spark is sort of the next best up, which you obviously can't play. So maybe restricting Bowmaster is something you could do to hit the Lurrus decks, but I don't know, man. That's just it's kind of one of those derpy cards that would it just doesn't feel like it's at the power level there. So it definitely would be taking a hit for Lurrus if that were the case. And I think it's good to have that cheap flash draw interaction in the format because we have ancestral recall and all this other stuff. I think it is good to have Bowmaster more readily available than as a one-off. But I mean, I could see them doing something maybe like that to keep Lurrus in check without actually hitting Lurrus itself. The problem for me is, like, what's the actual card that you hit? If you hit Bowmaster, does the deck just go back to being blue-white with Lavinias and things like that instead? I just think there's so many options for how the Lurrus deck can go that it would be tough to just kind of pick off like one supporting card and have it knock the entire Lurrus set of archetypes down a peg.
Okay, okay, that's fair. I do have to say, like, even though I barely play the format, I think I'd be bummed if Loris went. I'm a big Loris fan. I think you know that about me. I'm not sure. Even though I don't like playing the Loris deck in Vintage, but I do actually just like that card in general. So I'm kind of glad it has like a place where it's allowed to exist. And yeah, I think I would just be sad if it disappeared. Like, I just think it's the companions in general are just like such a interesting part of Magic's history to me. And I know that I know the mechanic was like not super well received, but I don't know. I was just a big fan, and so I really kind of like that there's a place where it's like, yes, this is here and this is good.
Yeah, I mean, part of why I like Vintage and to an extent Legacy so much is because I like playing with the mistakes. Those tend to be the most powerful cards. One of my all-time favorite cards is Time Vault, because if you look up the history of the Time Vault errata, we could do a whole episode on that one day, actually. Like, if you look up the long and winding history of functional errata for Time Vault, like you'll see them trying to like knock it back a peg in power level, and then it became unplayable, and that's now it's one of the most powerful cards in Vintage, and is part of a very common two-card infinite turn combo. And so, I think that it's really cool that there's places for cards like Time Vault, like Luris, where they were so powerful they literally had to change the way the game worked to try to keep them in the game. I think there is something to be said for having a place to play them, and the bar does have to be really high. With the old companion rule, it was definitely too much, and it made sense to ban Luris at the time, because when you could just go Black Lotus, Luris from the command zone or the companion zone for 3 mana, replay Luris, Storm count 3, or replay the Lotus, excuse me, Storm count 3. Like, that's so completely insane. Like, they had to do something. But with the new rule, I think even if it is maybe slightly over the line for too good, like, you gotta leave it. It's kind of the last place you can play it outside of EDH, and I think it does some cool things to the format.
Okay, so on to the one that people want to hear about.
Yeah,
Um, the uh, Legacy. I think I asked, but you said you did not watch the ban announcement video, right?
I did not. No, unfortunately, I was working today, believe it or not. But I I read the printed announcement online, but I did not watch the stream.
Okay. So, for anybody who's living under a rock and hasn't heard, Legacy had no changes. And this was wild because there were so many different ideas on what people should ban. Like, e- every ban announcement, Eternal Turtles runs a podcast where they get, like, I don't know, roughly like 30 people to come on and say their thoughts on, like, here's what I think should happen, here's what I think Wizards will do. And almost everybody said that there should be bans. There wasn't like a complete consensus on what cards, but the big ones that came up a lot were one of the enablers from Oops, so Balustrade Spy or Undercity Informer, um, Entomb, Reanimate, less so than Entomb, but Reanimate did get mentioned. Um, Cameo, which I think is silly. People mentioned Bowmasters, Nadu, the One Ring. Few people talked about Days, which, spoiler alert, Mark is a big fan of banning Days. Um, but yeah, everybody was sure that something would happen, and then just nothing. So I listened to the stream while I was making dinner today. I just pulled up the VOD, and it's funny because they even cited that this was the part of the ban announcement that got the most negative pushback. So they have they have heard loud and clear that we are not happy. Um, but yeah, it's crazy. Nothing got banned. So what did you think was going to happen, and then how did you feel when you saw this?
I think I want to go back and look at our text messages, because I think my what I actually said was my heart says band-aids, but my head says no changes, or something to that effect, and I can't find it now while I'm scrolling here and talking to you. But I think that I'm not necessarily surprised by no changes. I'm disappointed in no changes, but kind of given the history of how WotC has handled the legacy format and where win rates are and stuff like that, I'm not entirely surprised. I would have liked to have seen some changes. Um, I think one of my biggest problems is I know that there's a lot of controversy around days, and a lot of people view it as a pillar of the format and something that you just have to ban around, because it will never it itself will never be banned. And I think they sort of reference that a bit in the written announcement, where they talk about how, like we like to keep people's I don't remember the exact words, but it's basically like people like to play the decks they've invested in, and so like we like to kind of keep them in the format instead of completely nuking them. Those are my words, not their words. And I think the problem is like, but they banned Vexing Bauble, and I'm a Mystic Forge gamer. People know this. I'm a unapologetic Karn disciple, and so I hear them make these excuses for bans or for protecting days from bans and banning all these cards around it. But then they ban Vexing Bauble after like one pretty good Eternal weekend for the Mystic Forge deck, and it's like, God forbid that a blue player has to hold up mana to interact. Like, how come their deck is protected in this way? But Mystic Forge has one good weekend, and the people that invested in that deck now no longer get to play Vexing Bauble as some counterplay to the free magic that the blue decks have enjoyed for so long. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents on it. I think I'm not surprised. I am disappointed. I would have liked to have seen maybe a couple of different changes to the format, but ultimately we'll have to wait for the next window to see. But how about you, Maps? And were you surprised by no changes? Did you think something was going to go?
I was definitely surprised. Before I get into how I feel, I will say we definitely don't quite see eye to eye on Vexing Problem, but I do understand your frustrations. But I just, I needed the listeners to know, it's a new podcast. They need to know at least one of their hosts is sane. So I definitely, I thought there'd be changes. With the community being as loud about things as I feel like we were, I just, like, I knew something was going to happen, right? Like, especially too, they were like, okay, we had something from Blue Black Reanimator last time that drop it in a peg, and then it like didn't really seem to drop. So I was like, okay, well, clearly they're going to come back and like try again and fix their mistake, right? And then they just didn't do anything, and they're like, yeah, it's actually fine. So I don't know. It was just so wild to me. Uh, and yeah, and I know a lot of people have expressed disappointment too because it seems like there was a different amount of care that went into the previous ban announcement article that was not necessarily there for this one. Whereas like the last one talked a lot about player sentiment and we want to make the community happy. Like this format is propped up by its players. It's not about high level competition. It's about people enjoying themselves. And like we hear that and we respect you and all that. And then this time they're just kind of like, nah, you can deal with oops. You can deal with reanimators. So it didn't feel the same, and I thought it was pretty disappointing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. And you know, I I I look at the blue black deck as it's just so efficient at what it does, and this is just gonna, I think, continue to be a problem forever, right? Especially now that they're printing universes beyond cards into standard, and there's 6 standard sets a year, and standard is larger than ever. Like that means that they're just going to have to continue to ratchet up the power level to sell these cards and for these cards to be relevant in the larger standard card pool, which means that more of them will trickle down into larger, older formats, modern, legacy, vintage, etc. And when you get some of these really efficient 1 and 2 mana cards that they keep printing down into here, like the shell of that blue black deck, when you keep banning the role players out of it, there will be new role players. It's just simply how card design is, and this is an old format that's been around forever. And so if you something gets banned from the blue black or the blue red tempo deck, just wait 6 to 8 months, and there will be another thing to stick in that slot that'll probably be ban worthy because the rest of the shell props it up so effectively. So I think it's just they've got to do something because we're on this carousel of, you know, ban the role player, a new one gets slotted in, the deck is just as good as it was before, lather, rinse, repeat. And I think a lot of people are, starting to feel some frustration just around A lot of the format kind of feeling the same when the games go long, or in the case of Oops All Spells, you're dead before you can blink. And so I don't think either of those things are, especially interesting for a lot of folks that play a lot of Legacy. If you only play Legacy once in a while, it's probably pretty great format. But if you play a lot, a lot of the games, similar to Modern, start to feel the same.
Yeah. Yeah, so I will say, um, watching the stream did make me feel a bit better that we were being heard and seen. Um, so one of the first things they said was, this announcement was really like they were very focused on standard, which I think we all kind of understood. Um, and there's 7 bannings in standard, so definitely hard to argue that they didn't have an impact there. Um, Carmen then kind of explained her role in play design and kind of spoke to what I think most of the community has kind of figured out at this point, that she focuses more on the eternal formats. Um, and the way she said it, it was basically she really works on the kind of non-standard stuff, but it seemed like there's a focus on the paper non-standard stuff because they talked about arena, and she even said like, I'm not on the arena team, so like I'm not going to talk about that. So it really seems like she is when they talk about their in-house legacy expert, it seems to be that they are talking about Carmen.
Mm.
Um, and like I said, I think a lot of us kind of already suspected that, but well, she didn't confirm it. It was kind of nice to be like kind of stated a little bit more clearly. That being said, don't take out any of your anger or frustration on her. Like she's a wonderful person. She's trying her best. But she kind of talked about things a little bit more. With Oops, she like clarified because I know a lot of people were really mad about her comment that like it requires like deep, intricate rules knowledge or whatever. And I definitely don't think she worded that well, but she was calling out things like Jack o' Lantern was like a really niche find, like, um, and just like some of the cards in there, like Jack o' Lantern, Memory Journey, like you really wouldn't have thought about on the surface. So like they do need to you need to put in some work to come to those, and like the amount of effort that the oops community has put in over time, which is respectable. So she's like, there's clearly people that love this deck, so like we want to give them the chance to play it. She did say like they keep a close eye on it. She actually said that oops has been on sort of a watch list, and they've considered banning it for I think she said the past 4, 6 ban announcements in a row, they have considered banning it, even if they haven't mentioned it. So it's nice to know that they're keeping an eye on it. She said that the win rate is usually somewhere between like 47 and 53% for that deck. And that's like just not out of bounds, but like if it starts to creep up any higher, then they'll ban it. Um, so, bad oops players who are really doing us a disservice. We need the deck to win more so it can disappear, please. Um, but, it was kind of nice getting that information like, hey, we have criteria that we're looking for and we will hit it if the deck gets there. Like, she really laid out, like, we've heard the players, we understand people don't love this experience. She did compare it to other decks. She compared it to Your Baby Mystic Forge, which I didn't think was a great comparison necessarily, but she was saying, like there's other decks that can kill equally as fast, even though Mystic Forge is definitely a little bit slower. And some of those decks, such as Mystic Forge, can take more time. So like Mystic Forge and Doomsday, all decks that can take more time and are pretty fast. And saying like if you can put up with those decks, you should be able to put up with hoops. I don't really love that because I feel like with Oops, a lot of times you don't even get a turn one, so it's not quite the same. But like at least it kind of made sense. And then with Reanimator, they did elaborate like they have enjoyed having Reanimator in the format for a while. Carmen thinks that Entomb is a particularly fun and cool card. I don't know that I agree with that. I think tutors can only ever be so fun and interesting, and I say that as somebody where like Knight of the Reliquary and Elvish Reclaimer are two of my favorite cards. But like they can only be so interesting, right? Because they generate the same game every time. Um, and she did call out like Entomb's not going anywhere, but like if Reanimator is determined to be a problem, like she might look at Reanimate. Um, so I definitely do think it helped, like hearing them talk about this. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I don't know what banning a reanimate card will do because I mean, so they ban animate dead like you play Dance of the Dead or you play Metamorphosis Fanatic or any of the other multitude of options that are not quite as good as animate dead, but still let you look at 10 cards with Atraxa.
Well, to be clear, it was specifically Reanimate, right? And I think that one actually does change the deck because so you imagine a world where you go turn one Entomb, your opponent forces, you daze their fours, and now on turn two you can't just go okay Reanimate.
Yeah,
Um,
imagine if they didn't have the days in their hand. So yeah, the problem for me with the blue black reanimate deck is it's obviously been on the brink of too good for a very long time. But before this most recent iteration, the mono black or black red reanimate decks that were on like the Faithless Looting package or that sometimes would be Mardu for like the sideboard Serenities or whatever, that deck was like perfectly reasonable power level wise. Like it would win events, but never like run away with the format. Like it was a perfectly reasonable type of deck to play Entomb and Reanimate in together. And there were people that were very devoted to that deck and loved it and played it, right? And it only became a problem once that package was combined with the Force of Will Days Wasteland Shell. And I again, like I think it's just the best thing that you can be doing with reanimate, with tempo, with whatever. Yeah, banning reanimate will probably knock it down a peg, especially because 2 mana is a heck of a lot more than 1 mana. So you're looking at all 2 mana reanimate options after that. But I still think that as long as there's a really cheap way to bring back an Archon or an Atraxa, that deck's going to find a way to do it. And also, if you do ever ban reanimate, you kind of take like the mono black and the black red deck just almost completely off of the table, which it doesn't really exist right now anyway. But if there was ever a change to the blue black shells um, that hit some of the blue cards, I think that the deck would be perfectly reasonable going back to mono black or black red or Mardu. But if you hit reanimate, then that comes off the table. And again, like those cards were not a problem in the format before. It was only when it was combined with the Days Force Wasteland package here that it really started being a problem there.
dude, whenever somebody talks about old Reanimator, it just makes me miss Eric Landon and watching him crush the trophy race. Like I kind of wonder whatever happened to that guy. Um,
Yeah. One other thing I'll say on the topic of oops, like I don't. So it's funny. Like I hate Days. You're obviously not on that bandwagon with me. You hate
no, I'm
oops.
pretty
I
okay
I
with banning gays.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Well, so I know how you feel about oops. I don't love it, but I think I have a little bit more tolerance for it. And I think about there was an old Star City broadcast years ago where Patrick Sullivan was doing commentary, and he was talking about decks that like win on the fringes. I think was the term that he used, or but I might be butchering it, but it's something to that effect. Like but he was talking about, hey, Burn is a deck obviously that he's famous for. He was saying, hey, Burn, you just try to basically point 21 points of damage at your opponent's face. Like if you attack or do whatever, like that's a bonus, but like you're basically just trying to ignore what they're doing and race them. That's a simplification, right? But then he was also talking about decks like Mill or decks like Storm that don't win through the traditional interaction and combat damage, but that win through alternate mechanics. I think Thassa's Oracle decks like Doomsday, for example, would also fall into those categories or Breakfast. And so, I am an enjoyer of those kinds of decks that tend to win in non-traditional ways or, kind of take non-traditional routes to victory. And so I can appreciate looking at a deck list like I'm looking at this Oops All Spells deck that they included in the BNR announcement now, and like, yeah, it's got a Jack-o'-lantern and a Memories Journey, and it's playing four Pact of Negations and Legacy, like one Bridge from Below. It's really cool. Like it's obviously a very carefully constructed deck where like every single card in here has a very important purpose, and so it it's the kind of deck that rewards people for um, for really mastery of it and truly understanding their 75 inside and out. Or I've seen some of these lists play like 69 main and stuff, so maybe even like their 84 inside and out, or whatever the number might be. So I get it, but at the same time, like, when you lose the die roll and you didn't play a Force of Will deck and you're just dead, like that doesn't feel good either. So although I do have some respect for Oops and I understand Oops players and I have I'll call it an appreciation for the construction of a deck like this, I do think that it probably has a too high of a turn one kill rate, and I already don't think that you should have to be required to register Force of Will and Daze to play Legacy, and a deck like this just really makes it feel like those decks are even less of an option, and that you need Force of Will in your deck when Oops is one of the best decks in the format. So that's where I'm at. But I do always think back to that Patrick Sullivan comment about decks that went on the fringes, and I can definitely relate to that because I mean, I play a lot of these oddball decks that kind of win through non-traditional means.
Yeah, so I'm actually okay with decks that win through non-traditional means. That part doesn't bother me. Like there's tons of decks like Mystic Forge, Doomsday, uh, the mono blue like Thassa's Oracle deck, Storm variants. Like I'm generally okay with those things, and I do agree with you that Oops is like this really interesting design puzzle. Uh, the issue that I have with it is it shouldn't be as consistent and as fast as it is, right? Like I think that you kind of have to pick one. Like I think if you're going to be a deck that can kill turn one, like yeah, I don't know if that sucks. People should have brought Force of Will to stop you, and if they didn't, then screw them, you know. And I'm like okay with that. But then like the issue with Hoops is they're not like stopped by that, right? And like, yeah, sure, they should be able to beat one Force of Will occasionally or whatever. But like, I have seen screenshots where it's like somebody has opened a hand with like Force of Will, Force Negation, and Daze, and then just died on turn two.
Yeah.
Uh, and like that's that I don't think should be happening, right? Like I think if you're going to be able to pretty consistently kill turn one and then like pretty consistently fire off a second go on turn two, like you should also be losing to hate more easily than you are. Like it's just you see all these screenshots of like Oops being like, oh, I beat my opponent having like double force of will plus leyline of the void, or I beat this combination or that combination. It's just like it just feels like a lot of your decisions don't matter. And the deck used to have like these restrictions, and they just don't exist. Like you could also like even just ban some of the MDSCs and be like, yeah, you can still keep your 8 enablers, but like now you have to be built in this way because like the deck's customizable, right? Like one week everybody's playing Leyline of the Void, and you could just play Green Lands and play Force of Vigor, and then that goes away, and then like the next week you can build it differently, so you just have like a pile of duresses, or then the next week you can build it so you have like the board into Belcher plan, and I just like the deck shouldn't be able to consistently play through this hate, and it shouldn't be so customizable while being able to just kill so consistently by like turn one. So I feel like it needs to be knocked down a peg. Like if you want it to exist, that's fine. I don't think it needs to exist personally. Like I think there's so many other combo decks that people can play that like are in the bounds of what I think should be happening in Legacy. Um, and like Doomsday is like a good example where Doomsday can still kill you turn one, but if you have a Force of Will for their turn one Doomsday, a lot of times they have to wait like multiple turns before they can go off again. Um, and it's not always, but like I think people can just like play that deck, and like I understand it's you know, you're going from a deck with no duels to a deck with like four underground seas. So like I understand there's like a monetary difference, but I just think the gameplay of one is like much better than the other.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that I'm realizing when you're talking, what kind of led me down this path as I'm looking at this Oops deck list, and I was just thinking to myself, like, oh my God, this deck could have had grief in it before the grief ban. I mean, it did.
They used to.
There were versions of this deck, yeah, back in the day before the grief ban. I think it was before it got as popular as it did now, and before the list was as refined. But like, imagine these current lists with grief, and then it kind of hit me. The other problematic deck that we've been talking about also was a deck that had grief, and so in a way, both of these decks have already had pretty significant bans. The blue black deck obviously has had multiple rounds of it, but even the Oops deck has had grief taken out of it, and they're still at the top of the format. Like, just sort of interesting take there. I think that these black cards that they've been printing lately have been very, very good.
Yeah, which is actually really funny because I remember just like a few years ago, within the past, it was about 4 years ago, I think. There was no, not even maybe I don't know. Um, but Black was like unplayable, you know,
Yeah,
before before Orcish Bowmasters got printed. Like back when like Prismatic Ending was in everything, it was like, what do you need Black for? Like, you don't need Abrupt Decay, and then you just play counter spells instead of Thought Seizes, and um, yeah, and now Black is like top dog again.
well, I mean, you remember Simic was unplayable in multiple formats for so long, and then we got Oko and Uro and all of that other stuff, and then a couple
And
years
Nadu.
later, your favorite, I was going there, Nadu, the Sea King enabler blessing, Sea King's blessing enabler himself. Uh, yeah, so they tend to do that, man. It's like, hey, this is unplayable. Well, we're just gonna print like some of the most busted stuff ever right into this. Like there was that standard where you could play the Bant ramp deck that had Yorion, Oko, Uro all in the same deck. And I think Omnath as well. Was Omnath also in that standard? That was a heck of a standard. So anyway, so Mapson, any final thoughts here on the BNR? What do you think happens on the next one? Do you think there's more no changes?
Yeah, well, so I actually have a lot of thoughts still. Um, so have you looked at the timing of when the next one is?
I actually haven't. No, when is the next one?
So they announced it. I mean, I think it was already announced, but they mentioned it at the bottom of this one. It's November 24th, which is like, it sucks because it's so far away. So they can't even, like, I understand they heard what we had to say, but then it's like you can't even necessarily act on it until after Eternal Weekend. So that's ridiculous.
I thought they did a BNR like 2 weeks after every set. Is that not the case anymore? Because there's no way the
No,
next set comes out in November, right? There's a
no,
release long
they
before then.
they used to do that. They stopped doing that a while ago. I know they've been on like five different band cadences over the past 2 years, so it's
That's
hard to
hard
keep
to
up.
keep up with. Yeah, I thought the most recent one was that they were only going to do standard bands once a year, basically at rotation, and then there was like that emergency window and for other formats after each set. That's not the case anymore.
That is not the case
Oh my
now.
God, I'm
They
outdated.
they do the scheduled band announcements. Don't quote me on this, but I want to say there's three a year. And then this part you can quote me on. They are centered around competitive play. So generally, and they were actually talking about this on the stream today. They line them up with the competitive format. So they're kind of based around the RCs and the PTs as like the biggest competitive events. They did say this scheduled announcement was a bit of a miss because they didn't want to have it in the middle of modern season, but it was like the only time they could really figure out to make it work. Um, and so everything is based around like not changing things right before a pro tour or right before like the RC. And even the next one is like I believe the Monday after I believe it's the Monday after Vegas. Um, And one thing that Carmen did say that I so thankful for, 'cause people have pointed out like this is like the week before European Eternal Weekend, so everybody's kind of been like, well, they're not going to make changes because they don't want to screw up Legacy right before
Oh,
that.
sure. Yeah.
And Carmen basically was like, you know, Eternal Weekend is like really important to me, and I understand that like the timing on this looks really bad. So I would just say, like if something is truly catastrophic is happening, like, we can adjust. Like if Oops like wins like the US Eternal Weekend and like has like strong placings, like, we can talk before Europe. And Blake, who runs those streams, they kind of had some back and forth. I'm sure this isn't what happened, but it almost looked like Carmen was using this like live stream to kind of bully him into getting her way. And I'm sure that's not what happened, but like in my head, I'm just gonna, that's gonna be my canon, is that she was like fighting for us. Like, hey, I gave them a crappy BNR. I'm gonna hold the rights to fix this if I need to. Um, so yeah, they might make some changes before Europe. Notably, that won't help us over here in the States. So Pittsburgh will still be this boring format. But yeah, the timing is just like so bad.
Yeah. Well, I'm unfortunately not going to be able to do Eternal Weekend this year, so despite the bad timing, I'm not going to have to deal with it. But yeah, for everybody that's playing in that format, like I'm glad that it sounds like Carmen, uh, perhaps has some flexibility there if there's something truly egregious. But I think that, it sounds like it may potentially take um, the ability to make maybe some less drastically needed changes, but that might still be needed. Like it might still have the potential to delay those, which I don't love. But I guess we'll just have to see what happens. But hopefully there was enough, outspokenness from folks this BNR that they'll consider doing something if it still looks the same next time. Because I think even if no deck is clearly running away with every event, I think enough people are unhappy with the way that the meta's feeling right now that they've got to find a way to do something to shake it up, even if it's on bans or hey, maybe some of these new sets will shake it up. I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, yeah. I forgot that you're not going to Eternal Weekend.
I
That's a
know, I
shame.
know. I've got plans with the wife. I'm actually going, so it's funny. I'm going to Vegas for the RC, the modern RC, and then I'm going back to Vegas with my wife for a concert that weekend, like whatever that weekend for Eternal Weekend is. So a few weeks later. So I'm actually back and forth to Vegas for a few times, which will be fun. But yeah, no Eternal Weekend for me this year, unfortunately. So you'll just have to borrow my power and win the vintage event with it.
I thought you weren't letting me borrow the power. I'll win with it. I'll do it, and you're out. For the listeners, Mark has really nice power.
It is great to be able to draw 3 cards for 1 blue mana. I'll tell you, that's a heck of a card design.
Yeah, it's a shame too because you're gonna have all these fans of your nice new podcast
It's
trying to
true.
talk to you at Eternal Weekend, and you're just gonna be nowhere to be found.
I know. They're going to have to settle for some time with you, but I trust that you'll represent both of us well. So I know that we're in good hands there in that case.
Yeah. So usually this would be, we do our sign offs and say where you can find us, but here's the thing: I haven't set any of that up yet. In fact, we haven't even settled on what the name of this podcast is yet. It's going to be released with a name, and I'm going to create socials. But yeah, you can figure that out next. Well, in 2 weeks when we release the next one, and you can find it wherever you found this one. So whether it's my Blue Sky, me posting it on a Discord, whatever, you'll find it.
Yep, me showing up at your door, knocking, and having you listen on a Walkman. There's a lot of different ways you could come across this podcast. So, however you found us, thank you for listening.
I'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you then.